Hello, and welcome to this presentation of the MaLET Model, Maturity Levels for Exploratory Testing. My name is Daniel Ståhl, and I am one of the authors of the paper, along with Torvald Mortensson, Antonio Martini, and Jan Boch. So, first of all, what is exploratory testing? Well, it differs from what we might call traditional software testing, as it is not based on pre-designed test cases. Rather, it is a creative and experience-based approach where the results of executed tests are used to inform the next step in the testing. There are several books published on exploratory testing. We find it's a fascinating topic, and if you want to read more about it, we can recommend Explore It by Hendrickson or More Agile Testing by Gregory and Crispin. And as a shameless plug, Mortenson and myself published a book recently where we discuss it in the context of continuous practices. Now, we only have a few minutes available to us, so we're forced to keep this presentation very brief. You can find more details on our methodology in the paper itself, but the gist of it is this. In previous work, we have studied exploratory testing practices in industry and identified key success factors. While doing that, we observed that these success factors don't appear to be independent of one another, but rather that they tend to follow a certain pattern, kind of as if they emerge at different steps along a journey of organizational maturity. So, we looked closer at the data we already had available to us, and based on that, proposed a maturity model, maturity levels for exploratory testing. We then validated that by looking at a total of 8 companies, some of which we had worked with previously and some new cases, to see whether the model could do a good job of describing the progression or regression in some cases of their exploratory testing capabilities. And we also interviewed engineers in these cases to verify that the model was able to accurately capture their experiences. These companies are 8 independent companies from a wide array of industry segments, from automotive products and services to communication systems and services to video surveillance systems, and quite a few things in between. One thing they do have in common is that they are fairly large. All of them are multinationals with at least 2,000 employees, some of them much, much larger than that. The model itself, in a nutshell, is as follows. Companies evolve in the ways they practice exploratory testing, and this evolution tends to follow a stepwise pattern, where we have identified 4 distinct levels. These levels are, in order, permission, where exploratory testing is not actively prevented, but not supported in any meaningful way either. As one engineer put it, they had a test case called exploratory testing, and that was it. The second level is competence, where some of the testers, typically the more experienced ones, practice exploratory testing with some regularity. And what we can see here is that each level is associated with a distinct set of the success factors we identified in previous work. So for instance, at this level, you typically see having testers with good system knowledge and testers who know how the product is actually used by the end user, and testers who are curious and want to learn, something that should not be taken for granted, unfortunately. The third level is results, where a pull emerges in the organization. Insights from exploratory testing are actually asked for and valued by, for instance, developers and managers. Fourth, what we label collaboration, where all affected parts of the organization work together around exploratory testing. It's no longer something individual testers do by themselves, but it's a joint collaborative activity spanning disciplines and product domains. When we looked at each of the 8 companies and how they describe their experiences adopting and evolving exploratory testing, we found that they all follow these steps, as shown in this picture. But the interesting thing is it's not necessarily a one-way street. In 2 of the cases, we see clear examples of how they have actually regressed, for reasons we'll get to in a moment. But this is an important insight. The capability to effectively practice exploratory testing can be fragile and is under threat from several directions due to conflicting incentives. So, when we study these cases and in interviewing the engineers, we identify 3 main events that lead to an increase in maturity level. It can be the ability to show concrete results from exploratory testing, leading to a greater acceptance in the organization, a general willingness to improve, and an openness to change. And finally, that the organization itself matures, where testers show a willingness to collaborate and help each other, rather than act as lone wolves. Events that can lead to a lower maturity level include the development of a new product, which might introduce new technologies, effectively reducing the domain competence of the testers. We also identified churn of testers, where, for instance, if a senior tester who has been central to the exploratory testing changes jobs, the organization might regress as a consequence. Obviously, this is particularly a problem where the practice is not well established or institutionalized, but dependent on individual heroes, as it were. And finally, there is the constant threat of management decisions, where managers may perceive exploratory testing as inefficient and seek to do away with it in favor of automation. We also found that the feedback from the companies during validation has been very positive, with the engineers stating that the model was spot on, that this describes very well how exploratory testing has evolved in our company, and that this is a good way to find how we can improve. So, in summary, the 4 maturity levels represent the typical evolution path for companies adopting exploratory testing, and this path does not always lead forward. In fact, improvement efforts can easily fail, and this is where the MaLET model is not only a descriptive model, but we argue that it is also valuable support for practitioners in identifying threats and also relevant next steps to take their exploratory testing to the next level, as indeed indicated by the interviewees themselves. And so, this is MaLET, Maturity Levels for Exploratory Testing. Thank you for listening, and please do not hesitate to reach out in case you have questions.